Welcome back to In the Drink, the show about a man drinking alone in a bar.
What the hell did you just say?
Much like the subject of today's episode, Donald Draper, the protagonist of the hit show Mad Men, and more specifically, his cocktail of choice, the Old Fashioned. After Mad Men became the cultural behemoth that it is today, it propelled Don's signature drink, the Old Fashioned, into a new age of popularity. The drink itself, though, isn't just a benign decoration as many might gather. It, like many other things in the show, has a lot to say about the character himself.
Do this again. Old-fashioned, please.
Don famously belongs to the pantheon of characters that people frequently miss the point of by idolising. He's one of those characters that people in real life and in the show want to be. People want to be Don Draper. But nobody wants to be Don Draper more than Don Draper himself. He's a bit of an imposter in his own skin, his real name being Dick Whitman. Spoilers, by the way. Don is, as we see at the beginning of the show, a poor country boy who moves to the city and is naturally out of place.
You know, I've been discreet.
Once you say that, you're not discreet anymore.
Seeming quite quickly old-fashioned. This is something that we see come out quite prominently in his later relationship with Megan, who acts as the personification of more liberated, free, and non-constrained women of that era, something that Don ultimately fails to understand. Within the show, the making of the Old Fashioned itself is represented in two main ways. The first variation of the Old Fashioned that we are going to look at today more closely resembles what is frequently referred to as the mid-century Old Fashioned. Go figure. And we actually see him describe this to us quite usefully in this early scene with his daughter Sally.
Muddled. I mean, smash it.
So, without further ado, we are going to take a glass and we are going to start with a sugar cube, which would be a far more common method of getting sugar into an old-fashioned during the middle of the 20th century, as a sugar cube would be a marker of the cocktail's old-fashionedness. So, one sugar cube. We are going to take Angostura bitters. Because we don't see them being poured, you can do this to taste. I like quite a lot, but I would recommend 4 to 8. And now at this point, you might expect me to muddle this, but as we heard in the scene with Sally, Don says muddled. That means smashed.
I mean, smash it.
And he wasn't referring to the sugar cube, I'm afraid. What he was referring to was the fruit in the cocktail, as, in the middle of the 20th century, a wedge of orange would be quite common to find in an old-fashioned, muddled in there as part of the drink rather than as a garnish. Very much not something you would do today, frowned upon for reasons. Put into the glass 1 wedge of orange and a cocktail cherry. Maraschino cherries, if you can get your hands on them. I can, as it happens. So a little bit of that's going in there, but I imagine they would have used like those really crappy neon red ones. And a little bit extra syrup in there ain't gonna hurt either. And now it is time to muddle this veritable fruit salad to a paste. And break up that sugar cube. And the grittiness of that cube will probably help a lot of this fruit pulp break up too. Try and get as much of that sugar dissolved as you can, but it will not be easy. And now, mercifully, we can add the whiskey. Now, a bourbon would absolutely not be a bad way to go. Bourbon was incredibly popular in the middle of the 20th century, and probably still the most common spirit used in an old-fashioned today. But, as we see with Don prefers rye.
Keep a fifth of something in your desk. Mr. Draper drinks rye.
And his rye of choice, as we see many times throughout the show, is not an American rye, but a cheap Canadian rye whiskey, Canadian Club specifically. Usually, whenever we see Don in his home, in order to get a drink, he is always reaching for a bottle of Canadian Club whiskey. Because although Don lives in the upper echelons of society, appearing from the outside to be wealthy, affluent, influential, Don still prefers the cheap, easily accessible rye whiskey.
That's where you've been.
Because he doesn't really belong there, does he? We are going to go with 2 ounces of Don's favourite Canadian Club rye whiskey. And now to add ice, and again today, any crappy ice you can get your hands on, just some ice cubes that come out of your fridge, whatever you've got is perfect. So remember, we're just trying to replicate what we see in this scene. Give that a stir. more of a jostle. Try and pick up some of that sugar from the bottom of the glass. Now at this point, with an old-fashioned, you would usually expect to express a citrus peel over the top, lemon for rye or scotch, and orange for bourbon. However, I think there's quite enough citrus in here as it is, and we certainly don't see any in the scene in Mad Men, so this is what we got. Bottoms up. I'll tell you what, I was about to say that's not bad right up until the very end of that flavour profile. That starts out really nicely rounded. You get that fruit mixed with that Canadian rye whiskey, which is incredibly smooth as it is. It's not undersweet, as I worried it would be with the sugar cube and all the sugar sedimenting at the bottom. But then, because we added a wedge of orange that we muddled to death, and you just get that bitter, acrid taste right at the very, very end. That's not super pleasant, however. I mean, this is just muddled cherries, delicious, muddled orange, delicious, Canadian Club, delicious, and brown sugar, delicious. You see people knock this a lot, but that's not bad. But that is the first old-fashioned that we see in Mad Men, made by Sally Draper in Don's home. This is probably the way he makes one at home, when he's got everything he needs, and he's in no particular hurry with limited resources, as we see in the next scene. Now, there is one more version of the old-fashions that we do see getting made in the show. The next scene we're going to look at is, well, a very famous scene, and one of my favourites in the entire show. Don has a heart-to-heart with a man who he does not yet realise to be Conrad Hilton, the heir to the Hilton Hotel empire, where they discover each other hiding out in a bar to escape their respective parties.
I am at work, disguised as a party.
I'm at work disguised as a wedding.
Don mixes them both up, his version of the old-fashioned. So we're going to start with a glass.
I don't have a lot of time.
Now, in this scene, we get a very good look at how Don mixes up the cocktail, so we can replicate this very, very closely indeed, and that's what we're going to do right now. Or at least, that was the intention. You see, when I was writing the script for this episode, I was using this version of the scene, a low-definition YouTube upload from 13 years ago. Now, when doing the edit, I downloaded the high-definition version of this scene, and I caught this glaring continuity error. You see, in this shot here, we can see Don put the sugar cube into the glass, and then it cuts to a wide shot, and then back to the close-up. Now, in the low-res version of the scene, what looks like two bitters-soaked sugar cubes in the bottom of the glass turns out, when we transition to the high-definition version, is undoubtedly two bright red cocktail cherries. We do not at any point see Don put these in the glass. In fact, if we go from the initial medium shot, where Don shakes Conrad Hilton's hand, and then cut to the wide shot, if we zoom in, we can see these two cherries magically appear in the glass, with Don having gone nowhere near the bowl of cherries next to him to put them in the glass. Now, naturally, when referencing the low-resolution version of the scene, I didn't catch this. And as a result, the cherries did not end up in the drink. However, whether we added the cherry or not will be largely inconsequential to the way this drink is going to turn out in the end. So if you want to replicate this scene accurately, I would recommend adding a cherry in and then following the rest of the instructions as laid out in this video. Alright, cheers, back to the video, bye. And we're going to start by taking one sugar cube, putting that in the bottom of our glass. We then see Don take some Angostura bitters with a label taken off to avoid copyright issues with the show. This is called Greeking, by the way, and we very specifically see him do 5 to 6 dashes of Angostura bitters. No more, no less. And I quite like Angostura bitters, so let's go with 6. However, this doesn't next go in the way you would maybe expect it to. It kind of goes a little bit off the rails. Don then takes a glass in the show, like so, and he fills it with ice.
Nice piece of property, though.
He next then reaches for rye, because there's no bourbon on the bar.
Rye okay with you?
You look like you know what you're doing.
The rye we see on the bar is Old Overholt rye. I can't get that here in Scotland, but Old Overholt rye is a high corn rye. Woodford Reserve rye is the same. This is a high corn rye, so the flavours should be similar. And weirdly, he takes this glass full of ice and his rye and just sort of free pours something like that amount into the glass. Very unusual.
I am at work, disguised as a party.
What Don then does is he takes some soda water.
Why's that?
Make me nervous. All those expectations.
And he adds some of that to the glass. About that much. He then returns to his sugar and bitters and muddles these. Now he doesn't do it for long.
That is a match made in the boardroom.
Just enough to break up the cube. That's it. He literally presses 2 or 3 times just to break the cube up a tiny bit. And that's all we want, because remember, we're just trying to replicate what we see in this scene. He then returns to his soda and rye, loosely mixing it like so. Again, just enough to get it mixed together. Takes his bitters and sugar and just free pours some into the glass.
Twinkling lights, violins, girls giggling about something. It's different inside.
He then takes a wedge of orange, each for him and Conrad Hilton, shoves it in the glass, hands it over, and they enjoy. No mixing in the glass, doesn't touch it, that's it. Let's give it a try. As you might expect, that tastes like some rye whiskey that's been watered down. The fizziness from the soda's gone. I guess the director for that episode or something had to put soda in it because he heard some people use soda to break down the sugar cube in an old-fashioned. Didn't understand that, so I was like, do it like this. And there was no one there any the wiser to really correct him. I mean, it looks exactly like it does in the show, but yeah. So yeah, it just smells like a glass of whiskey, not much else. You do, despite it being high corn rye, you do get some of that rye spice. Again, this is just going to be a tasting note for a glass of watery rye. That sugar has not mixed in at all. That is just sitting right at the bottom. No orange oil, anything was expressed, so that's not been touched. I think the Angostura bitters has percolated up ever so slightly, so you do get a little bit of the Angostura spiciness complementing some of that rye spiciness that you'd expect from a whiskey like this. But apart from that, not a whole lot to say on this.
Hell of a cocktail.
Says, hell of a cocktail. Not gonna lie, hell of a liar. This kind of sucks. So there we have 2 old fashions as we see them made exactly in Mad Men. Neither of them particularly satisfying though. So yes, whilst we have done this in the name of accuracy, I think a lot of people might not know that this is not how you correctly make an old fashioned. So, in the interest of education, what I am going to do is make for you an old fashioned properly, right now, very quickly. We'll just bash this out. Take a nice big ice cube if you can get your hands on one. I made these lovely dense clear ice cubes to look fantastic on camera. Instead of using a sugar cube, which is difficult to dissolve, but some people like the texture, I like a simple syrup. It allows the cocktail to be consistent and everything mixes in and you really know what you're getting every single time. Personally, I just add a bar spoon. This is 2-to-1 Demerara syrup, by the way. Demerara, fantastic toasty flavour that really complements that whiskey and those bitters. We are also going to add some Angostura bitters. If you're not too fond on these and you really want the whiskey to stand out, you can do as little as 2 dashes, and that is a perfect old-fashioned. Again, I quite happen to like Angostura bitters. I'm going to add like 8 dashes because I really like these. And then for my old-fashioned of choice, just for variety's sake, we're going to go with a bourbon. I managed to get my hands on some Buffalo Trace, which is a very popular, very delicious bourbon. You use whatever you like. Scotch, bourbon, rye, Canadian, Japanese, Welsh whiskey if you want. The technique will be the same, 2 ounces. And stir. We are then going to take our poorly mutilated orange. We are just going to extract from this a peel. I always prefer using a knife to do citrus peels because I find peelers express too much of the oil when you're peeling. We're going to express those oils, rub that over the rim, and I'm going to tidy this peel up just a little bit. And that will continue to infuse in the drink over the time you spent drinking it. Let's add a cherry to this. And that's a nice colour to the visual presentation of the drink, and that cherry syrup will slowly infuse with the cocktail over time. let's give this a try. A proper, modern, old-fashioned. Oh, delicious, much more balanced. It looks fantastic, it tastes fantastic, it's remarkably well balanced. Very easy to see why a cocktail such as this has stood the test of time, because it's quick, easy, simple. You got some bourbon, some sugar, whatever, just put some bourbon, some sugar, some Angostura bitters, very quick, very easy, and it's just a fantastic way to showcase all the great notes of whatever spirits you want to make an old-fashioned out of. Fantastic cocktail, I think we've made this quite well. Yeah, I could drink several more of these. There we have 3 cocktails. 2, as we saw made in Mad Men, one by Don Draper's daughter, Sally, but probably the way he would make one at home with some Canadian Club rye whiskey. 1 from the famous bar scene between Don Draper and Connie Hilton, where Don mixes them up in old-fashioned whilst they're on the run from their respective parties in this very, very famous scene. And finally, dissatisfied with the on-screen representation of these 2 old-fashions, we've rectified that by showing us the proper way to make one, or rather, because it's a formula and a matter of preference, the way I would make one and the way that's probably most common to find one today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this rant/cocktail video about one of my favourite shows of all time, one of those brilliant written shows that I've ever seen, and I don't think I'm going to find much argument by making that point there. Thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching this every bit as I enjoyed making it. And I do, I really, really love making this show. I'm really, really appreciative of every single one of you who watches thus far. If you haven't watched thus far, you've enjoyed it, and maybe you would consider subscribing. Maybe that'd be a good thing for you to do. We'll do more pop culture cocktails, we'll do more culture and history in cocktails. We've got a lot coming up, so a lot to be excited about. Thank you very much for watching, and yeah, see you next time.